Hello and welcome. You are watching my Star Wars The Old Republic review. In my post-beta first look, I went through several categories and rated them with an A through an F. For my final review, though, I'm just going to take a look at the good and bad aspects of the game and just give one letter grade at the end. I should mention right up front that I will not be covering PvP in this video. This is an area where my experience is far too limited to give an informed opinion. So I'm starting with the very first thing that you do in Star Wars, which is create a character. Now the folks at BioWare clearly didn't think first impressions were terribly important, because it seems like the designers took about 10 minutes to design a system and 1 day to implement it. It's very sloppy design, it's got very few choices, it's really disappointing from a AAA title, and it's one of the few things in Star Wars that I have absolutely nothing good to say about. So, moving on. Now, one element that I have very little bad to say about is the graphics. They're very well executed within the somewhat cartoony style. Personally, I like a little more realism, but I like to judge things by how well they're actually executed and not necessarily by my personal preference. So the only thing I'll say against the graphic quality within the game is that they really should have spent more time with textures, particularly as they apply to clothing, which always looks like plastic, and despite what some may try to tell you, clothing does not look any less like plastic at higher levels. Now the sound in this game is also very good, and as I've said before, it sounds exactly like the movie, which is exactly as it should be. The musical score, on the other hand, leaves a lot to be desired. You're not going to hear anybody talking about how great the music is in this zone or that zone like you might see with other games. Now that said, though, music is used very effectively in building mood during combat, so taken as a whole, from effects to music, I think the sound of this game is really a high point. Now when the hype started ramping up for Star Wars, I was very skeptical of a voiced MMO. I have to say, though, that the voice acting in Star Wars has definitely lived up to the hype. It's well acted, sometimes understated, but never melodramatic, and is, in my opinion, the primary reason this game works. Now, the use of really bad alien languages that force you to read stuff still annoys me, but I tend to just skip the dialogue in those quests and move on. Taking a look at the interface, there really is only one good aspect for me to talk about. I like the map. It looks the way a map in a sci-fi game should look. The functionality is really great too. Waypoints or paths you need to take are lit up in green. Move your mouse over the path and the quest it's associated with will flash white. Hover over the quest you want and the point on the map flashes white. It's one of the few truly well thought out features in this game. The rest of the interface, not so well thought out. It's a half-baked system in which nothing but the chat box can be moved, and there is no window stacking, meaning you can only have 2 windows open at a time. Now granted, you may not often need more than 2 windows, but you'll definitely need it at times. Is one of your quest rewards an equipment mod? Well, you won't be able to do any side-by-side comparisons with what you have equipped, because the moment you open one of your item windows, the quest window will automatically close, and you'll get to select your reward whenever the next time is that the quest window happens to reopen, usually when you're turning in another quest or changing zones. So like character creation, the interface is really sloppily designed, and I wish I could say that this is the last time I'll be bringing up lazy or sloppy designs throughout this review, but unfortunately it ends up kind of being a recurring theme. Now companions are mostly well executed and will be an enjoyable aspect of TOR for most players. There are a few areas where the companion system needs some tweaks, but the biggest one is the fact that everyone within a class has the same exact companion. Yes, you can alter the look of your first companion, some classes more than others. This does not apply to companions you get at later levels, which cannot be altered. There's also no way to change a companion's name, and likely will never be since the names are repeated many times within the story. Despite being backed by an excellent storyline, quests in TOR are very standard. Go there, kill 10 space rats, come back. What makes the quests a little worse than most games for me is how long a quest can take to complete when you have to travel forever to get to the quest objective, killing multiple mobs on the way there and all the same mobs on the way back, and often you don't have any other quests in the area. It's an aspect of the game that is very tedious and at times will make you want to log off and play something more exciting like Windows Solitaire. Now to answer my critics from the first look, yes, there are sometimes multiple quests in one area, and often you'll get bonus kill quests. But unfortunately, there are far too many single quest expeditions, and you almost never find areas where you can grab like 8 quests and complete all of them in just one area, like you can frequently in most other games. Speaking of bonus quests, if you're starting TOR, you'll want to hear this so you can avoid the bonus quest hell that I found myself in on my first character. Make sure that whenever you see a Kill 25 Space Guys bonus quest pop up, you actually complete it. Many of these quests cannot be abandoned later, and the last thing you want is to have to go back to planets that are like 10 levels beneath you and waste hours of your life walking to some worthless areas to kill worthless mobs just to clear your quest log. Now, I didn't know this when I started, so now my level 31 Sith Inquisitor has 8 of his 25 quest slots taken up with undroppable bonus quests strewn across the galaxy. And this one on Balmorra is particularly fun. I was supposed to complete this in a story area, and guess what? I can't drop it, and I'm locked out of the story area. Now, once again, BioWare demonstrates sloppy, or at least poorly conceived game design, and in this case, it actually has a serious negative impact on me, the player. But moving on. Now, at level 10, you'll have a few new things available. One of them is flashpoints, SWTOR's version of the instance. I think this is a real high point for TOR. I won't take any more time to talk about them in this review, but if you want to find out about flashpoints, you can check out my Black Talon video. And you'll also gain access to PvP battles, which I didn't review, and finally you'll get the talent tree and crafting. Now in SWTOR, you choose an advanced class within your primary class, and moving forward, you'll get your primary class abilities, plus you'll get abilities specific to your advanced class. Now, you'll want to read about advanced classes before you choose because the choice you make will have a dramatic impact on your playstyle. Now, once your choice is made, everything else is pretty standard fare for MMORPGs. I spent most of my time playing Sith Inquisitors, and I chose the Sorcerer primarily because it has the corruption tree for healers. Now, every class has a talent tree that is shared between the two advanced classes, and for the Inquisitor, that tree is Madness. I was particularly interested in the shared Madness tree for the Sorcerer. The description states that it increases mastery of the Force to drain and corrupt enemies. I also got a picture in my brain that Madness must imply some strong mind control elements as well. What I found, to my great disappointment, is that for the Sorcerer, all Madness really means is an alternative way to enhance your lightning damage, which is a different way to enhance your lightning than you'll find in your lightning tree. Now, looking at the Sorcerer, right off the bat, there is a handcuff. No matter what tree you want to follow, your best option from levels 10 through 14 is to take 5 points in lightning in order to enhance your force abilities. Now, another thing that I found is that gear plays a much higher role in your effectiveness than do your talent choices, at least up into the 20s. So, as a healer, I joined several groups with DPS spec sorcerers and was able to outdamage them because of my gear. Now, hey, this was a lot of fun for me, but it was kind of lame for them. The talents themselves were not terribly well thought out either. This one, for example, is a rank 2 talent that increases the damage and healing of area of effect abilities. The only problem is that at this point, I have one AoE damage ability, which is a close range knockback and therefore something I wouldn't normally use as a healer. I have no AoE healing abilities and won't get any until much, much later in my progression, meaning that there's absolutely no purpose for me to take this talent at rank 2, or even 3 or 4 for that matter. Now overall, the talent system is, in my opinion, fairly typical of other MMOs. Now I'm not going to spend a lot of time with crafting. A lot of gamers will be thrilled to find that they can send their companions that they aren't using anyway off to craft for them, meaning they don't have to stand at a space loom making shirts. Beyond that, though, this is really just like any other crafting. You gather, you craft. It costs a lot of credits, but making credits in SWTOR is really a non-issue. It's pretty standard fare for an MMORPG, with the one nice improvement, if you're not a fan of crafting, that you don't have to waste a lot of time doing it. Now, at around level 16, you'll get access to your ship, which is basically an area you have to get to in order to transport between zones. Now, on the ship, though, you can grab some quests and engage in space combat. Now, all space combat is a name given to Star Wars' minigame. You fly on a set course and have to both kill a bunch of stuff as well as survive over a designated period of time. That said, I really liked space combat. Now, it might seem like a slap in the face to anyone expecting actual PvP space combat in TOR, but taken for what it is, a minigame, it's actually a nice quick time waste when you're bored with walking around or just have nothing better to do. Now, the primary problem I have with the space combat minigame is the size of the reward. The credits and XP you can earn from an hour of space combat is outrageous considering how easy the game is. Now, that's something that you should definitely take advantage of for now, but also something that I suspect is going to be scaled back quite a bit in the future. Now, prior to the launch of TOR, there was a ton of hype about world size. The common line on forums was that planets would be the size of a continent in WoW. Now, when I began exploring the Star Wars universe and realized that this is not true, I actually got kind of ticked off. Well, when I looked for the sources of these rumors, I realized that they didn't originate with BioWare. There was a statement made by BioWare that Alderaan is about the size of 8 WoW zones, and this seemed to be part of what started the hype machine rolling. Now, what you're looking at here is me crossing Alderaan on my speeder and timing it so I could compare the actual size of this zone with the zone sizes in WoW. The fact is, Alderaan actually is the size of 8 WoW zones, which is not to say that it's the size of a continent. Now, this is a continent in WoW, at least one of the original ones, and this down here is 8 zones, and that's the size of Alderaan. Now, Alderaan is not the largest zone. Tatooine is far, far bigger than Alderaan, and although I've only seen part of Hoth, I believe it to be much more massive as well. But there are also much smaller planets. The 4 starting worlds are tiny. Drummond Cost is about the same size of the average zone in WoW. Balmoria is slightly bigger than Drummond Cost, and if you could actually measure the walkable surface of Nar Shaddaa, it would likely be a little smaller. The interesting thing about these zones is that they really don't feel any different than the standard zones in other games. Alderaan is Alderaan. If you've seen part of it, you've pretty much seen all of it. The subzones on the planet have very little variance in style from the rest. Tatooine is ginormous, but because it's a barren desert, they rightly made Tatooine with a lot of big empty space, and you'll end up doing about the same number of quests and therefore spending about the same amount of time here as you would in any other zone. In the end, what you have is a universe with 17 zones, some tiny, some outrageously large, and it balances in the end into a rather average-sized gaming world, which is to say that it is not as big as WoW, but it's much, much larger than Rift. And despite the outrageous pre-launch hype, I think this game launched with a rather impressive amount of real estate when compared with other recent releases. Now, where TOR really fails for me is in the environment. It's just a shame, too, because the worlds generally look really good. There's a few repeated landscapes here and there, and in my opinion, far too liberal a usage of crashed spaceships. But all of the planets look really solid. But the environment is one area in which the sloppy programming comes shining through. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Ambient noises in this game are seriously lacking. Yes, as some said after my first impression, this does get far better in later zones, but why should it? Why should the starter zones be largely devoid of world noises? Now, there are places in this game where you can stand right next to a waterfall and not be able to hear any water. How does this happen in a AAA title? Now, in the Star Wars universe, planets, they don't spin. Therefore, you have no day or night cycles. Now, there's also no weather cycles in this game at all. There is rain, but it's area-based, not weather cycle-based. So, for instance, here there's always rain, and out here there's never rain. And then up that hill there's always rain. Or here in Cost City, right here on this bridge, there's always rain here, there's never rain here. Now, in my first review, I talked about all of the mobs that just stand around and don't do anything, usually in groups of 3, and there's been a lot made of this in other places, as well as the lack of life in cities and such and so on. That's been talked about ad nauseum. It doesn't get a lot better. It gets a little better. You do find roaming mobs here and there once in a while in later levels, but it's usually like one mob that moves on a small path between other mobs that are stationary. At any rate, none of this is the worst aspect of the Star Wars environment. The worst aspect of the Star Wars environment is the clones. And these are not the Clone Wars clones either. These are clones that were made by lazy designers that said, these 3 models are what people on Tatooine look like, and then they dumped 1,000 copies of those 3 models onto the planet in random places doing random nonsensical things. Now here I am in Drummond Cost looking at one such clone standing there looking confused. Now sometimes he kind of wanders back and forth, and sometimes he hops up on a wall for some reason. Here's another variety over here, and he's with the, I don't know, I guess these are the standard thug clones in Drummond Cost, and they're clearly having a very interesting conversation. Now over here is like a Sith apprentice. Here's a couple of women that are always there having a conversation. And you'll notice, like, I can click on the women, they're actual characters. I can click on all these people. I can click on that guy. But a lot of these are nothing more than decoration. They're not even clickable. It's like they're not even in the game. They might as well be a design on the wall. By the way, this Drummond Cost citizen, as you can tell, is really engaged in a conversation with nobody. Now, here's another Sith apprentice with our thugs, and they're clearly very afraid of him. Now, I can click on the Sith apprentice. I can't, however, click on the thugs. They're just decoration. They don't really exist, I guess. And then we're coming back around to where I started, and we'll get to see our friend of the clone standing here, looking all confused on the stairs. At least he's not standing up on the wall. That's a fun thing to see. But every time I come into Drummond Cost, this is the scene I'll see. He'll be there, everyone else will be where they are, and that's just the reality of life in Star Wars. But what I really love is when the clones happen to find themselves in the middle of combat like this. And my favorite example is this one here. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, the environmental sloppiness of this game, it stands out like a sore thumb, largely because no other game that I can think of was designed with such an obvious attitude of, hey, we don't give a crap. Now, they knew they were EA and BioWare, and they knew this was Star Wars, and they knew they could do a sloppy job and still sell millions. And I'm sorry, I just don't see any other explanation for this. Now, the last thing I'm looking at is the story. What makes the story work primarily is the voice acting. But that said, the story is a success in that it does what it needs to do. It's woven nicely into the leveling process, and it keeps you wanting to find out what happens next. It's a very solo-oriented story, which is rather strange in an MMO, and it's definitely a BioWare story, which means that generally the good guys are always the worst bad guys of them all. But it is very engaging, and by itself could keep you re-upping your subscription. Now, the major downside of the story is that it is one area in which I really think BioWare really duped us in their pre-launch hype campaign. And BioWare maintains to this day that the decisions you make have a dramatic impact on your story. That's simply not true. What you can do is change the way a story ends. For example, at the end of the Nar Shaddaa story, I can choose the dark choices of making this guy the leader of my new cult and killing the people who've been helping me all along, or I can choose to kill the guy and let these fine young folks run my cult. What I've done is changed how I perceive my character along with my memory of the story. What I have not done is change my story moving forward. Whichever choice I make, I'm never going to interact with these characters again. The story's over. Now, once in a while, you'll get an extra and immediate step in your quest chain because of a decision you made. In much rarer cases, and I'm talking like once every 20 levels or so, you'll have someone refer back to some long-past choice you made in a conversation. But neither of these will ultimately impact your story moving forward at all. And in every conversation, you'll make the same choices when you're dark and evil as you would have if you were light and good. Now, honestly, this would not have bothered me at all if BioWare had never hyped this aspect of the game in the first place. I would have taken it for what it was and never thought twice. But even now on the SWTOR website, you can find this statement. The team has left a lot open so that your decisions have a significant impact on the way the storyline and the characters develop. And again, just want to say it, it's not true. Now, beyond the letdown from what had been advertised as dynamic storytelling, the implementation of the story is marred by, you guessed it, lazy and sloppy design. It's not as bad as the environment design, but it's still there. A couple of examples of this are too many characters that look too much alike, and way too many regurgitated answers.
Murder and mayhem await. Murder and mayhem await. Murder and mayhem await. Murder and mayhem await. What exactly does this have to do with me? What exactly does this have to do with me? I missed the part where this was my problem. I missed the part where this was my problem.
This is of great importance.
So here's the deal with Star Wars: The Old Republic. I actually had a lot of fun playing it for a month, largely because of the voice acting and the class storylines, and for a lot of people that's going to be the most important thing. Now, unfortunately, this is a really poorly designed game. It becomes very clear with the amount of money that was sunk into this game that there were a lot of people over there at BioWare and EA that made a lot of money for doing very little work. The type of sloppiness that you see here in Star Wars, from a full-price subscription-based AAA game, it's just inexcusable. So if all you're looking for is good entertainment to last a couple months, and you can overlook the sloppy design, you will almost certainly enjoy your time in the Old Republic. I know I did, and I had a hard time overlooking the sloppy design, obviously. But if you're looking for an MMORPG that you can dive into and play for the next year or multiple years, my honest opinion is stay away. Beyond the enjoyment of your first run through a storyline or two, there's just nothing that has been done well enough to keep this game going. And although BioWare managed to combine elements of the solo RPG with the MMORPG, they did not make a game that lives up to the standards set by their competitors in the solo market, nor did they make a game that lives up to the standards set by its competitors in the MMORPG market. So with that, I'll give SWTOR a final score of C+. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.